The amazing tale of Elizabeth Shoaf's abduction and subsequent escape starts a lot like the fairy tales featured in the first Disney movies. You know, the ones from before. There's a beautiful young and innocent girl from a small, quaint town. She's kidnapped and led through a thick and disorientingly dense forest near her home. She's taken captive in an underground bunker by an angry antagonist, a brooding villain seeking revenge on the local law enforcement. Her poor family, desperate to find her, searches everywhere for their girl. But somewhere along this storyline, on one of the long, dark days in that dim pit hidden in the ground, Elizabeth Shoaf reveals herself as a Disney princess from the present, one with gifts and song and survival skills. There's no white knight, no Prince Charming in this story. The young girl from the quaint town, Elizabeth Shoaf, she's her own brave hero, using her own smarts and courage to rescue herself from the horrific criminal. It's an amazing story of strength and survival, one of hope and justice and inspiration. It's the abduction and escape of Elizabeth Shoaf. Fourteen-year-old Elizabeth is described by her friends and family as shy and caring. She loved music, her cats, and her family. She was just starting her first year in high school and was excited about the 9th grade. September 6th had started like any typical Wednesday, except that Elizabeth had slept in. She had rushed to school that morning with hardly the chance to put any makeup on. She said goodbye to her mom and ran out the door just in time to catch the bus. Elizabeth took a bus to and from school in Lugoff, South Carolina. Lugoff is a small town 30 miles northeast from the state capital of Columbia, and Elizabeth lived in a rural neighborhood near the woods. Due to their age difference, Elizabeth's younger brother, 12-year-old Donnie, got off of a different bus and walked home first in the afternoons. The Shoaf children were obedient. They did as their parents asked, and the rule was to come home and do their homework until their parents arrived home from work. They always locked the door for safety. But today, Elizabeth would not even make it through the door. As she approached her home, a strange man wearing what looked like a sheriff's uniform with a badge walked up to her. He told her that he was arresting her for marijuana and that he already had her younger brother. This was a lie. The man wasn't with the sheriff's department. There were no marijuana charges, and her brother was safe inside their home, but Elizabeth couldn't know that. The strange man led her away from her house and into the woods. Madeline, Elizabeth's mom, would usually call home in the afternoons from her job at the pharmacy to check in on her children. She told NBC's Keith Morrison in 2008, "My son answered the phone, and I asked, 'Is your sister home yet?' He said she wasn't home yet, so I asked him to run up to the top of the driveway to see if he had seen her." When he didn't return to the phone right away, Madeline began to worry. Where was Elizabeth? Maybe something had come up. There were a dozen little things that could have delayed the bus, or perhaps she had been caught up at school. But the truth was, Elizabeth had after-school plans that she had been excited about. Elizabeth's aunt had planned to stop by the house to cut her hair for her. That visit from her aunt was what Madeline thought about as she dialed Elizabeth's friends to look for her. Elizabeth was excited to get her hair cut and to see her aunt. She wouldn't have missed that on purpose. The thought was eerily echoed back to her when she reached Amanda Lampert on the phone. She was really happy because her aunt was coming down, Elizabeth's friend Amanda said. Amanda had talked to Elizabeth on the bus, saw her get off, and saw her walk up the road to her house. Another friend, Scott Crosby, had seen Elizabeth too. He told authorities that they walked up the road together before he got into a friend's car. She had been last seen right next to her own driveway. It baffled her parents. How could Elizabeth just vanish in front of her own home, in broad daylight? At first, it was bewildering, and then, as night fell, terrifying. Her dad, Donald Shoaf, rushed home from work to look for clues of his daughter. They searched her room and found no indication that she had planned to leave. Nothing she valued was missing. Her favorite clothes, her music, it was all there. There was money in her room. Nothing missing, nothing indicating that Elizabeth had run away. The Kershaw County Sheriff's Department sent a deputy sheriff out, and her parents told him everything that they had learned so far. Still, law enforcement concluded that Elizabeth must have run away. The bulletins sent out to surrounding counties that night listed Elizabeth as an endangered runaway. It did not mean that they wouldn't look for Elizabeth. Kate, one of the sheriff's best tracking dogs, was brought to the home. But unfortunately, Kate sniffed all over, up the driveway, along the road, at the bus stop, but found no scent to follow. Several deputies checked the neighborhood for clues that Elizabeth may have left behind, but found nothing. When there was no word of the 14-year-old's whereabouts by the next morning, more deputies arrived, with more dogs and a helicopter. Elizabeth's father said, "That's when it really hit me, when I saw the helicopter and they were looking around. I dropped to my knees, and that was it." The family was feeling a sickening sense of panic. When local stations picked up the story, news spread of Elizabeth's disappearance quickly. That's when the people arrived to help. Friends, strangers, volunteers, all wanting to help find Elizabeth. "I mean, these are people I didn't even know," Dawn told the media. A neighbor made a flyer. Madeline and her sisters made copies to distribute, and hundreds of volunteers helped with flyers and ground searches in the area of her home. On day 3, they brought in dozens of trained search and rescue on mounted horses to search places otherwise difficult to reach on foot. We sent out during this investigation everything we had in the sheriff's office. We had our school resource officers out there. We had everything we did, our bloodhounds, our mounted patrol. We used everybody we could get our hands on, Sheriff McCaskill said. The Shoaf family asked for an Amber Alert. They begged the sheriff to call one, but his hands were tied. There would be no Amber Alert. There was no car, no description of an assailant. Well, the criteria didn't fit number 1, the sheriff said. There was no vehicle, which is required by the Amber Alert. We did not know who she may have been with. There was really nothing to put out there. So days passed, and the search continued. Don Shoaf, Elizabeth's dad, said, "I don't know how many miles I put on that four-wheeler. I mean, I stayed gone until I couldn't see anymore." They looked just about everywhere for Elizabeth, he said. Through the woods, every road, every ditch, every highway, every empty house you could go to. Then, 7 days since Elizabeth had vanished, a group of friends and family had organized a vigil at the nearby state capitol. Madeline was getting ready to attend. She recounted the evening's events to NBC News. As I left, went by and picked up my cell phone and grabbed my keys, and I was heading out the door, and I happened to look at my cell phone. "Hi, Mom. It's me, Lizzie. I'm in a hole across from Charm Hill, where the big trucks go in and out. There's a bomb. Call police." I just knew it was her. I knew it was her. Just the mannerism of the text. You just sit there and you know how your child talks to you. I was like, my God. I said, "Dawn, this is her," Madeline recalled. Police were surprised and unsure what to think. It was either one of the greatest breaks we could hope to have, or a prank by someone trying to be funny or throw a wrench in the way of us finding this girl, said David Thomley, who now teaches criminology at Camden Military Academy. Elizabeth's mom was certain, though. She had called herself Lizzie in the text. It had to be her. That was what her mother called her. The area described in the text was private property. It was owned by a chalk mining company that had been an area that officers had not yet been able to search. Despite the dark of night, officers were immediately dispatched to the location. Simultaneously, U.S. Marshals began to trace the phone number. Hours through the dense woods, and still they couldn't find her. In 7 long days, the text message was the first real lead. If it didn't pan out, what was next? For the family, it was another long, sleepless night. Meanwhile, the Sheriff's Department, alongside the Marshal's Service, were working diligently to discover the owner of the phone that had sent the text message. The man's name was Vinson Filyaw. He had prior convictions for burglary and public drunkenness, but he hadn't been seen in almost a year. Authorities told Elizabeth's parents that they had a suspect, and, armed with a search warrant, deputies rushed to the address associated with Vinson Filyaw. It was a single-wide trailer about 5 miles from Elizabeth's home, but Elizabeth wasn't there. And neither was Vinson Filyaw. After an extensive search of the home, and with the assistance of Vinson's girlfriend, what they did find was an escape tunnel out of the trailer home, and bunkers dug throughout the backyard. That night, after Elizabeth had not been found at Vinson Filyaw's trailer, her family were at home, dismayed, watching the news on TV. And there it was, that text message that Elizabeth had sent to her mother, and a picture of Vinson. Her parents were furious. Sheriff McCaskill defended their decision to take the lead public. Well, we presented it to the media because we wanted him to know that we knew. I was thinking it was a risk, but I was thinking that it was a risk worth taking. The Sheriff's Department had made a calculated decision based on their experience with the criminal. Vinson Filyaw was an unemployed construction worker who had been running from the law for over 10 months. He was facing criminal sexual conduct charges involving a 12-year-old girl, his girlfriend Cindy Hall's daughter, who he once referred to as his second housewife. Vinson seemed to mistakenly believe that this 12-year-old victim could consent to his abuses in some way, and believed himself to be innocent of any wrongdoing. In an interview with Keith Morrison, he said, "I wasn't going to jail, and I didn't care if I had to live in the woods for the rest of my life, you know." At first he lived in a tent, but that was temporary, while he spent his days digging, scheming, planning and digging, days and months in hiding fed his rage. The Kershaw County Sheriff's Department had sent him into hiding, and he wanted payback. He wanted to cause pain. At first, he intended to kidnap that 12-year-old victim. He wanted to use her to lure the law enforcement of Kershaw County to a bunker and just blow them all up. But then she was moved into foster care out of the area, so he had to concoct a new plan to kidnap someone else. Vinson posed as a deputy from the Sheriff's Department he despised and arrested Elizabeth on phony charges to scare her and gain her compliance. He had a badge that looked real. The man told her that her little brother had been caught with marijuana, that Donnie was already under arrest. He handcuffed her. Elizabeth was bewildered and confused. Instead of marching her to a police car, he led her away from the road. They walked around the house and into the woods. Next, he hung a contraption around her neck and told her it was a bomb. They took a dizzying path in circles through the dense forest. Nobody knew these woods better than Filyaw. He had spent months living in them. He took Elizabeth on a long path to confuse her sense of direction. He peppered her with questions about her home life and sexuality. Finally, After walking an hour, on trails and off, through dense thickets and doubling back, the madman, the crazy villain in the woods, leaned over and lifted up the earth, revealing a hidden trapdoor and a bunker dug 15 feet into the ground. One that he said was booby-trapped with guns and explosives. He told me to go down a ladder and get into the bunker. He had like a rifle and a belt that had guns, and I saw a taser on it. So I knew he was really equipped to do anything if I acted stupid or whatever, Elizabeth said. But Elizabeth wasn't going to act stupid. Inside that bunker, Elizabeth feared for her life. She was threatened with handmade grenades and a flare gun. He threatened to hurt her. He threatened to hurt her family. I just didn't know what to do. I was just scared I was going to die, she later told local WIS reporters. Then, she was forced to strip. She was raped and bound by a chain around her neck. On the second day, Elizabeth thought that she was about to be rescued. She could hear helicopters and see the shadows of people searching for her above ground. Elizabeth dared not cry out. Vinson threatened to use the taser to knock her out if she did. Soon, the shadows and sounds faded. Besides, Vinson had told her if anyone got too close, his explosives and booby traps would get them. Vinson told her he had rigged up a contraption to shoot at intruders when a tripwire was stepped on. They ate instant noodles cooked on a propane stovetop. The shelves inside the bunker were made with cut branches and canvas. He had dug a primitive toilet and brought toilet paper. They used a battery-operated TV to watch local news coverage of her own abduction. After one heart-wrenching piece, Vinson turned to Elizabeth and told her, "You'll never be found." I had to sit there and watch my family on the news. Each time WIS came on, I got to see my mom and dad crying, begging to see me. It was more or less torture, she said. Vinson slept during the day, keeping her chained up. He raped her repeatedly. Day-to-day life was wake up, get assaulted, she later said. Eventually, the days and nights bled together. The incessant trauma and dim monotony of time spent sitting in the bunker was disorienting, and after several days, she didn't know how long she'd been away from home. Elizabeth described the experience to NBC's Keith Morrison. It smelled muggy, really, really muggy. In the afternoons, and then at nighttime, I'd be really cold. I would sit there for like hours, just thinking about my boyfriend and my family and friends, and just cry, because that was all I could do. Maybe that was how she felt, but somehow Elizabeth maintained her composure and, unsatisfied with her current situation, thought up a way to take back control. I guess if I wanted him to trust me, I'd have to have him think I kind of wanted to be there and be more comfortable letting me do things I wanted to do, she told Meredith Vieira on the Today Show. Elizabeth was able to pretend that she enjoyed the sexual assault. She told her captor that she loved him and that she wanted to run away with him. Elizabeth humanized herself, psychology professor and sexual violence prevention expert Elizabeth Jeglett told A&E True Crime. Instead of being a random victim, she became more of a human being. Finally, after days of this, Vinson was less threatening and less violent. Elizabeth was allowed to leave the bunker to stretch her legs and walk a few times. When she did, always thinking of ways to escape, ways to be found, she left strands of hair in the woods in case a tracking dog could pick up the scent. Then, one night, while outside of the bunker getting water, Vinson used his cell phone to text his girlfriend, Cindy. And another idea popped into Elizabeth's head. Maybe she could wait until he was asleep and use his cell phone to reach her mom. Thank God she had memorized her mom's cell phone number. It was risky. She could make him mad. but she had to try something. That night, while Vinson was in a deep slumber, Elizabeth took his cell phone. She carefully, quietly sent her mother a text and waited in the dark, damp bunker. There was no reply. There was simply not enough signal inside the bunker to send a message. But this did not stop Elizabeth. Nothing could stop her. Nothing could squash her spirit. For 3 nights in a row, so many failed messages. Would she ever reach her mother? Then Vinson caught her with the phone. She had been afraid this would happen. Would he be furious? She told him she was just playing games, because sometimes she was. She told him she was bored, and sometimes she was. After days of humanizing herself, of manipulating Vinson and softening their relationship, he decided that she could use his cell phone to play games. Finally, one night, he fell asleep, and very careful not to make noise, she crawled up the ladder and lifted the heavy trapdoor by herself. "Hi, Mom. It's me, Lizzie," she typed out. "I'm in a hole across from Charm Hill, where the big trucks go in and out. There's a bomb. Call police." She pushed the button to send the message. Another failure. She sighed into the cold night air and descended back into the disgusting bunker. Then, on day 9, helicopters, just like that first day after she'd been captured. When Vinson turned on the news, he saw his own picture staring back at him. The anchors were talking about the message Elizabeth had sent to her mother. He was furious. Then I thought I was going to die, because he was angry, and I just sat there and cried and told him it wasn't me, Elizabeth said. Vinson began acting erratically. He had been caught, but not found, exposed. No one had set off any of his booby traps. There had been no explosions, no bullets. What next? Should he run? He asked his unwilling companion for advice. Elizabeth told him to run. She told him to pack his bags and leave before the police arrived. She acted like she wanted him to be free. But she was about to finally be free of him. Unable to locate Elizabeth based on the description of her location in the text, law enforcement used cell towers to triangulate her approximate position. They started right away, before the sun had even come up Saturday morning. A team conducted a grid search, lining up and going step by step through the forest, scanning for evidence of Elizabeth. Captain David Tomley was walking near the end of the line as part of that search when he heard Elizabeth's voice calling out in the dim dawn light. She was shouting, "Hello!" I knew it was her. I could feel it was her. I would have walked through hell on a Sunday to get her. Captain Thomley said he was overcome with emotion. He could not believe it. Here was Elizabeth Shoaf alive and talking to him. He ran up to comfort the crying teen. She was standing at the door of the bunker, tears of happiness and relief running down her cheeks. "I have been looking for you everywhere," he told her. They called an ambulance, and while EMTs transported Elizabeth safely to a nearby hospital, Captain Thomley walked the mile out of the woods to her home. He got to tell Elizabeth's parents that she had been found safe. Madeleine Shoaf said, "When he said that he had her, it was like my whole life started again. It was like my heart had just started beating again." The family rushed to the Kershaw County Medical Center where Elizabeth had been sent for evaluation. Their sweet reunion was filled with hugs and kisses. Elizabeth was okay. At a press conference, a $5,000 reward for information leading to the capture of Filyaw was announced. When asked about Elizabeth, Kershaw County Sheriff Mike McCaskill said, "We're going to leave that girl alone until she's ready to talk." But Elizabeth was ready to talk. In fact, she wanted to warn police. Vinson Filyaw was out there somewhere, and he had a whole 6 hours head start. Elizabeth recounted her horrific tale of abuse and torture. She warned them all about the threats he had made against her family and the weapons he had at his disposal. Brave Elizabeth made it through 10 terrible days living in a bunker in the woods, but she still could not go home. Vinson was out there somewhere. It wasn't safe. So, when she was discharged from the hospital, she went to her grandmother's home. 10 hours later, and approximately 6 miles away, at about 2 a.m. early Sunday morning, in front of a pizza restaurant, a second hero came face to face with the villain Vinson Filyaw. After a full day on foot, Vinson had decided that if he was really going to escape, then he needed a car. After some consideration, he selected Jennifer Lynn, a woman who was out with her young daughter in the back seat, to steal a car from. Unfortunately for Vinson, Jennifer was unafraid and recognized his face from the news. She knew who he was right away, so even though he was carrying a knife and a gun, Jennifer would not be intimidated. Instead of handing over her car, she cursed him out. She told news reporters, "I was kind of cursing him out for doing this in front of my child, for putting my child through this. He's already hurt one little girl." He knew he wasn't getting my keys, and he said, "Okay, never mind," and started running down the sidewalk. Jennifer called police right away, and thanks to her tip, Vinson was located, still on foot, just a few hours later. He was arrested that Sunday morning, September 17th, alone, without a fight, about 24 hours after Elizabeth had been found. Authorities announced the next day that he would be charged with kidnapping, possession of an incendiary device, and impersonating an officer. They said that more charges were likely to follow after the interviews with Elizabeth were completed. She attended his first bond hearing that week, sitting in the front row. "She's doing great," her mom told the CBS Early Show. "She's a very strong girl." A few weeks later, in October, Vinson appeared in front of a judge and agreed to give DNA in the case against himself, to test against the DNA collected from the crime scene. Judge Ernest Kinnard denied him bail on the 10 new charges of criminal sexual misconduct in the first degree that had recently come down from a grand jury indictment. Elizabeth did not attend this court session, but her parents did. Her grandmother told Adam Beam of the State that she was going back to school, and for now her family was driving her. But Elizabeth felt that she was ready to take the bus again. In the months that followed, Elizabeth was able to finally ride the bus home again. She enrolled in therapy to help her get through the trauma. "It takes talking to someone and encouragement that it's not the end of the world," she said. Nearly a year later, as everyone was preparing to go to trial, Vinson Filyaw pled guilty to all of the 17 charges set against him. And on September 19th, 2007, Beaufort County Judge G. Thomas Cooper sentenced Vinson Filyaw to 421 years for the kidnapping and criminal sexual assault of Elizabeth. For each charge, the judge gave Filyaw the maximum sentence. The next year, as a high school sophomore in 2008, Elizabeth made television appearances on Today and Dayline. She spoke at a ceremony at the State House in Columbia about finding the strength to move on. "While being down in the bunker, I was repeatedly raped threatened, and tortured for 10 days straight. I never knew if I was going to live or die, or if I was going to see my family, friends, or boyfriend again, she said. Every day I was down there, I prayed for God to help me and to help everyone who was trying to find me. Throughout the years, Elizabeth has continued to tell her story to give hope to others, to let people know that despite facing the worst, you can survive. She has appeared on numerous talk shows and news outlets. In 2018, a Lifetime film on Elizabeth's experience and escape was released. It was titled Girl in the Bunker. These days, Elizabeth spends her time as a dental assistant. She exercises and takes self-defense classes at a family karate studio. She has a sense of humor about her past. I feel normal. I go to work, come home, play video games, hang out with friends on the weekends. It helps me not to think about it and feel like I'm living a normal life. Though she does still sometimes think about the days when she was kidnapped. But I just think of it because I don't want to forget it, because that's something I accomplished that a lot of people might not have. And it makes me feel good to know that I got to get through something like that. When she tells her story, it's to give hope to others. She says, if you've been through anything, you can still make it. You can be a survivor just like I am. It's not the traditional fairy tale ending, but Elizabeth is no traditional fairy tale princess. She's an extraordinary one. She needed no white knight to save her. She did get some help from law enforcement and the Kershaw County Sheriff's Department. But after her rescue, Sheriff McCaskill said, I know she was scared to death, but she stuck in there. She thought. She used her head. I can't say enough good things about her. Let's face it. In my eyes, she rescued herself. Vinson Filyaw died at the Kirkland Correctional Institution in Columbia, South Carolina in May of 2021. Elizabeth prevails.